welcome everyone. Thanks so much. As Sage just said, this is the beginning of our webinar series. So this is going to be a 5-part webinar series called Eyes on Infrastructure. Every week, we're going to explore a new topic related to climate for infrastructure here in New Orleans. We're going to hear from excellent guest speakers and community leaders. We'll introduce one of those amazing people in just a second. Healthy Gulf, Committee for a Better New Orleans, and ISeeChange are the ones hosting this series. And we hope to both explore these topics as a group, and then also see what forms of action we can use to help make a difference and inform the federal infrastructure funding that's coming down the line. So to jump into what we're going to be exploring here. First, we just wanted to set a little bit of context for why we're here. We're at a really unique time in American history. There's a ton of opportunities of federal infrastructure funding coming down, both on climate, on infrastructure, on workforce development. We've got the IJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IRA, so many opportunities. But the question is, where's this money going to go throughout the country? And I know that many on this call are really hoping that it's going to come to the city of New Orleans. So there's a really big opportunity in front of us. But one of the main questions that many of us have found ourselves asking is, how are we going to ensure that the funds are equitably distributed? We want to know that, there's the first challenge of acquiring the money, but then it's making sure that the neighborhoods and the communities that need it most are able to share their voices and inform and direct this funding. So each week, we're going to look at how different topics pertain to this. This week in particular, we're going to be looking at energy. And we're going to approach this in 2 ways. So we'll start by building our knowledge, and that'll be hearing from leaders in the community who work in these areas. And then we're going to find out how we can share our stories and our experiences to help provide information to the decision makers and show them, hey, we actually, this is where that money is needed. This is where we need more funding and more resources. So as I just mentioned, this week, we're going to be looking at energy, and we're really, really thrilled to have Jackson Voss from the Alliance for Affordable Energy joining us. Jackson's a climate policy coordinator, and he helps inform both state and federal funding opportunities for Louisiana, focusing on climate change and energy justice. And so without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Jackson. And you can either give me a little thumbs up or a verbal keep it moving when you want me to hit next on your slide. Just let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you, Caroline, and thanks, Sage Michael, and everybody else for having me here tonight. It's good to see y'all. As Caroline said, my name is Jackson Voss. I work for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. I'm based out of Lafayette, Louisiana, actually, but I'm from New Orleans, and most of our organization is based out of New Orleans, as I'm sure many of you know. So we'll go on. We're going to talk about energy justice really quickly in the context of this conversation. So to provide a quick definition of this, this comes from the Initiative for Energy Justice. Energy justice, or energy equity, is the goal of achieving equity in both the social and economic participation in the energy system, while also remediating social, economic, and health burdens on those by the energy system. So go on the next slide. And so I thought a really good example of how we're falling short of this actually can all be encompassed in some way by what people recently went through in the city in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, right? And so during that storm, obviously, much of all of New Orleans, all of Orleans Parish, and much of Southeast Louisiana lost power for a significant amount of time, despite the fact that local utilities had assured people that they would have infrastructure that would in place that would ensure that would not happen again, right? These are promises that were made in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in particular, but it's something that we hear often after other storms, is that we're going to harden the grid. We're going to make sure that the power stays on or comes back online as quickly as possible. Part of that strategy on Entergy's part was to build a natural gas power plant. And this is just some blurbs from this article about what happened, which was basically that despite building this new gas-fired plant, despite the promises and the many fees collected by a utility like Entergy, the grid was not ready for a storm like Hurricane Ida, and it did not hold up. In fact, it took nearly here, let's see what it says right here in the article. It took nearly a week, I think, for power from this power plant to actually even reach people living nearby the power plant. And actually, speaking of that, and we'll go to the next slide. This is where the power plant's located. You probably know of it. It's in New Orleans East. And if we go to the next slide, I put together some charts of some of the demographic data. So in the upper left-hand corner, that's the distribution of the New Orleans Asian population. Upper right is the New Orleans Black population. Bottom left is white population, and bottom right is Hispanic population. As you can see, very few white residents reside near the power plant. A lot of people of color reside near the power plant. Unfortunately, in New Orleans, race is highly correlated with income. So this means that this power plant is located in a part of town that's surrounded by lower income communities of color in particular. And so not only did their power go out, but these are people who are more exposed to emissions from that power plant and bear the cost of having that kind of infrastructure in their backyards. In many ways, I think that we at the Alliance think of this as being one of the critical components of energy justice is repairing these damages by transitioning our sources of energy, but also thinking about how we provide energy differently. And that means taking on a variety of challenges, all of which are are felt very profoundly by people who live in a city like New Orleans, right? And so we'll go to the next slide. So what all are we talking about in terms of how do we achieve energy justice in a place like New Orleans, and understanding that not only do we experience storms like hurricanes on a regular basis, extreme weather events are more common now because of climate change, and consequently, New Orleans is more vulnerable than before to extreme heat. We've seen many tornadoes recently, which for those of us who grew up in the area, I can personally attest to not seen tornadoes in the region terribly often until recently. Addressing these things is going to require a lot of different strategies. From an energy perspective, attaining energy justice requires alleviating, reducing, or eliminating energy burden. So this is the cost of energy based on your household. So because energy costs are not based on your income, you're more likely to be impacted if you're low income, right? Just because you don't have a high paying job doesn't mean that you don't have to pay for your power bill, unfortunately. And so you are more burdened as a result of that because you're paying a higher share of your income on power. Energy insecurity, which is hardships faced in meeting other basic household needs when you're paying for your power bill. And then energy poverty, which is lack of access to power itself. And this happens to people often in New Orleans because the power goes out pretty frequently. So alleviating, reducing, eliminating those things, and then fostering energy democracy, which is just to say the community should have real meaningful agency in shaping their energy future. And this is a conversation that we're excited to see is happening in a more robust way here in New Orleans. An example of that being the conversation around community lighthouses, right? You can go to the next slide, Caroline. Thank you. So grounding this in a sense of how do we actually do these things? How do we alleviate those first three and foster or create energy democracy? Some of the policies that we're really thinking about and pursuing at the Alliance include bolstering energy efficiency and weatherization for residents of cities like New Orleans and people across Louisiana. Energy efficiency is just how well your home and your appliances are actually utilizing the electrons that come through the wires in your house, how efficiently they're able to use that to do the task that it's supposed to do. So whether it's your fridge keeping your food cold, or your air conditioning, which if it's working, unlike mine right now, will keep your home cool. And weatherization is actually the integrity of your home to ensure that'll vastly affect how energy efficient your home is, right? So what weatherization has to do with how well your home retains heat or cold or is insulated in order to better use energy. Another way that we get to where we want to go is to go through a just transition to renewable, reliable energy. And so this is really a two components. It's a just transition really refers to the fact that there's an acknowledgement that our economy and our energy system currently depends on fossil fuels to function. And transitioning is going to require a lot of disruption to day-to-day life, inevitably, right? People who work in fossil fuel industries will have to find new jobs if we transition. And so a just transition means accounting for these things, making sure that we're providing work for everybody who might lose work. It also means things like ensuring that communities that are currently overly burdened with the waste and the presence of energy production are not burdened even more with new things, right? So we often talk about this in the context of places like the river parishes or Cancer Alley. So there's this build out of industry. It's very disruptive, and there's a lot of pollutants that are related to that. And there are these conversations about, well, we can bring new industry. And then the questions that come from communities in those affected places is, well, is this also going to impact our lives in a negative way? Like, it might be an exciting new industry, but is this really a good transition for us? And so that has to be part of the conversation. And so really from the energy context, we're talking about moving from oil and gas and coal-based electricity generation to renewable energy energy production, either solar or wind primarily. And then finally, one of the last things we need to really make sure that we talk about is ensuring accountability from utilities and regulators. In the New Orleans context, that of course is the New Orleans City Council. So we'll talk a little bit more in detail about some of these as we go through the solutions. Next slide. When it comes to this whole conversation, and Caroline and Sage Michael, I think you opened this up well, talking about how do we make sure that we're accounting for equity in this process as we bring down federal dollars. We get a little bit of help from the federal government. And for anybody who already knows about this, I apologize for repeating it because I'm sure you've heard about it before. But for those who are unfamiliar, Justice 40 was an executive order signed by President Biden at the beginning of the administration. And the goal of Justice 40 is to make sure that 40% of the overall benefits of all federal spending and investments are going to go to the most disadvantaged communities across the country. And so this is the description on the left here. On the right is actually a map of the New Orleans census tracts that qualify as Justice 40 communities. So you can see that wide swaths of the city actually qualify as Justice 40. And consequently, these are the places where about 40% in the grand total of the state budget, 40% of all federal investments are supposed to go to these shaded communities. So we can go to the next slide. And so and I guess don't need to change the slide, but just to back up really quickly. So that's one part of the equity thing, is making sure that funding is going to where it needs to go the most, right? There are other components to this, things we need to think about, because there's a lot of things that fall under the IRA and the bill and IRA, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, some of which are funding things that we may not think are truly equitable, right? There's a lot of conversations in environmental justice communities about things like carbon capture and how that would actually not be like an equitable change. But those are things that can be funded through through the Justice 40 through the Justice 40 program. So we'll go on to the next slide now. So Bill and IRA opportunities. Yes. So Bill is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I just don't want to call it IJA because I do not like that phrase. Sorry. Nellie and I have had this conversation before. So I think that so just to talk about, there's all the goals that I mentioned previously: energy efficiency, weatherization, and just transition to renewable, reliable energy, and accountability. All of these things are actually included within both Bill and IRA. There are federal funds available to help pursue these objectives. So really quickly, I want to just show as an example, The home weatherization program, which is primarily for seniors, fixed income, and low income people, and as well as people with disabilities, is a way to help weatherize people's homes, make them more energy efficient, and connect them with other programs that they may qualify for to ensure that they are getting as much bang for their buck, for lack of a better phrase, whenever they're using electricity in their appliances. Where the state is going to be getting a few $100 million, I believe, just for weatherization assistance. That's a conversation we're going to be having with the Department of Natural Resources, how to best use, and the Louisiana Housing Corporation, how to make sure that that money gets to the people who need it most. One issue with the weatherization programs is that you have to have a home in good enough condition to actually be weatherized in order to qualify. And so that's something that we are going to have to figure out and help people figure out, is how do we get more funds to people who need to repair their homes. There's a lot of people who haven't even repaired their homes from the last storm, or even the storms before that. And so those people are going to need more help in order to get to the weatherization part of this conversation. We'll go to the next slide. And in terms of accountability and renewables, just transition, there are funds to actually help communities. And these funds, all the funds that I'm describing right now, the weatherization assistance program will go to the state and then be distributed out to nonprofits who provide those services. These funds are actually are funds for accountability primarily, and they include things like air monitoring and projects to help provide transition, or also hold local governments accountable. And these are actually things that nonprofit organizations can qualify and apply for. So you may know of organizations that are currently applying for this first grant up here, the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants. Those are currently open applications. So I just really quickly, I hope that this was a useful presentation, but I wanted to just kind of go through how we kind of think about energy justice, and some of the things that we see in the federal funds. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jackson. We'll have some discussion time, and Caroline, you could your time when we need to bring it in, let us know. But we do see Nelly just post a question in the chat. And if you want to put your question in the chat, I'll read them out, and Jackson, you want to respond to them. So Nelly question is, Nelly, go ahead and read your question now, because I'm scrolling through the chat right now. If you
No
don't
problem.
mind.
I was wondering, Jackson, you mentioned that the state will be responsible for distributing weatherization funds. Is that through a formula? Is that through like nonprofits that have already been pre-identified, or is it something that nonprofits could apply for?
Yeah, so these go to nonprofit organizations. They're called community action centers. But the state receives it based on a formula. It's based on how many people are estimated to be in need. So it's based on your population of really people collecting Social Security is primarily what they use to figure this out, because it's people with fixed incomes, disabilities, or who are elderly. When those funds come down, the state will get them and then give them to these community action centers, which are actually service providers. So they're nonprofit businesses, really. And so
But specific ones.
I wish I knew all their names.
Okay.
I could try to find.
They're already identified. It's not.
Yes, they're already identified.
I couldn't say like, oh, CBNO wants to do this now.
If you wanted to hire and train a workforce that goes around weatherizing homes, potentially, yes, I think you could apply to become one. And so I think, but the distribution across the state is also formula based, so it's based on population. So the larger population centers will get slightly more funds and things like that.
Hey, Jackson, we see Monica Clark, Gregory agrees with Monica that that when we talk about weatherization, let's get innovative. Let's not just do the same things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I think that there's this ongoing conversation, not related to energy exactly, but especially when it comes to flood insurance and homeowners insurance, right? About people rebuilding in ways that make them continue to leave them vulnerable, in part because they're not getting enough assistance to actually either elevate their home or relocate to somewhere safer. These are things that we're going to have to really think about and one of the problems, I didn't have a chance to include this in the slide, but one of the problems is that Louisiana is one of the lowest spending states on weatherization and energy efficiency assistance from a state level. And so we are 46th, tied for 46th with 4 other states, but we actually spend less than the other 4. So it's a tie based on percentage, not amount. So anyway, all that to say though, I think we do need to think about more seriously, and I'm not sure it even needs to be too creative. It's just an acknowledgement that these things cost money, and if we don't do these things, people are going to have a much harder time making ends meet and getting through these events.
That's right.
And it's only going to get harder because as the climate changes, extreme weather events and heat will get harder here in Louisiana.
Thank you. Let me know that during time. I'll move forward with another comment. And yes, there's a question about the presentation, but this is being recorded. The recording will be available. Caroline will talk about that more at the end of the webinar. And as well as Jax, you mentioned times are getting hard. I mean, climate change making change harder. We have Shannon talking about, does this include living wage and benefits for jobs creation? Because as things get harder for the people and cost of living is up.
Yeah, Shannon, it's a really good question. The answer is that it will depend on how the federal government determines some of these allocations. There are some requirements for either federal prevailing wage and certain other labor agreements that are going to be included in some of these rules and regulations that are given out for these funds. So I think the answer to your question is probably, but it's also going to require people on the ground submitting public comments, participating in the process whenever there's an opportunity for public comments, and making sure that people know, like, we need the federal government to put those requirements on us, because the state of Louisiana probably is not, right? And so I think that's something that we're actually working on right now, especially with regard to offshore wind and a few other things that are in the pipeline, so to speak. And so the goal, I think, from our perspective, is to make sure it does include living wages and benefits for the jobs created.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And as you mentioned a lot in the presentation, you talk about weatherization programs, and the question Aria says, what are some examples of implementation of home weatherization? Just right quickly, I live near a canal. I have subsidence in the home I live in. So, you know, the Dorset's crooked. I was seeing light through in the wintertime. I definitely was having drafts, and I know that kind of gets my utility bill. And so I went to Home Depot and bought some sticker installation and did that. But what other innovative solutions that you may know that we can do that's innovative, as I did have to buy possibly a product that's from the fossil fuel petrochemical industry?
Yeah. Well, so I'll say this. It's for weatherization, it's actually very simple, right? So I think Sage Michael gave the example of his window. Oftentimes for people, it's really just provides, doing caulking around windows and doors and putting in insulation. There are just certain things that people's homes are not up to standard on, because they may be living in an older home. They may be living in a home that was more cheaply built, and consequently it doesn't have all the things it might need to actually be weatherized. And so this can include things as simple as roof repairs too, but those are obviously things that can be very expensive depending on the extent of whatever damage or how old your home might be. And there's a lot of people who live in those older homes and those more affordable homes who got those homes in part because they cannot afford to invest in something that's more expensive, right? And so the weatherization assistance is intended to kind of help close those gaps, literally and figuratively. So weatherization is pretty simple, and it's something that could save a substantial amount of money for people. I think the estimate that I saw was about $350 a month, potentially.
Yeah, and thank you. I appreciate that. And like you said, we have to hold industry leaders accountable, as Shannon reiterated in the notes in the chat. And just, I know we're at 6:30, but tell me about this. We talk about innovative things, and Arthur Hunter says, how does solar farm generate energy to homes and businesses? There are projects with like Together New Orleans have the community lighthouse, where those church institutions provide light and power when light go out. There are many other people, like restaurants, that are getting together and getting these grids at those restaurants. But what can we do? And could you answer Arthur Johnson's questions directly?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll answer that and also answer Patricia's question that she just posted as well. So, and actually I'll do it in this order. First of all, Patricia, there is a new federal solar grant program, rebate program. It's more generous than the last one, and it'll be around for at least the next 12 years. So if you are living in a home that you know you're going to be in and you are able to afford solar panels, know that you can get rebates, pretty substantial and generous rebates to put solar panels on your roof, and actually to also install a solar battery system. And so then that'll lead me to answering the other question, which is how do you actually get power from solar? How does that work? So Sage Michael mentioned Community Lighthouse and community solar. There's also solar farms, which was mentioned in the original question. So there's a lot of different ways that you can set up solar. You can do rooftop solar, and that just kind of connects directly into your home grid, right? And so and you can actually store that energy in a battery and save it for when it's not sunny, and you can use the power later. You can also get energy from, and community solar would be basically doing that for multiple homes with one solar array, right? So the Community Lighthouse Initiative, my understanding of the idea would be that you'd use something like a church, for instance, to basically host all of these solar panels. And then you could use that, create basically what's called a microgrid. So a small interconnection between homes and buildings to provide power from that solar array to multiple people. A solar farm is really is a larger scale, right? So a solar farm would usually be owned by a company that's either selling power to a utility or would be set up by a utility to provide for its customers. And so it all works kind of the same way. The one thing with the solar farm is that the solar farm would have to be connected through transmission. Solar panel rebates, I can get you a link for that, Murph. But I would say, so solar farm is kind of like usually more commercial, industrial kind of idea. And then those are the different levels of solar that I can describe in a concise way.
Thanks, Jackson. Shannon Waters and Freddie Leslie, I do see your hands raised. I'm gonna make note of that. But we're going to move forward with Caroline with ISeeChange presentation and switch to that gear to talk about how we can use these stories and this data to come about these solutions. And thank you for that presentation, Jackson. Thank you for that round of questions. It was robust questions. Thank you for that. I did make note of those who raised their hand. And so we try to save some space towards the end of it for another round of questions. And I'll make sure I get to you all first. Thank you all for that. Caroline with ISeeChange, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Sage. And thank you so much, Jackson. You did a fantastic job covering many of the opportunities that are really on the top of our minds around energy right now. So just kind of recentering where we were in the presentation, Jackson really helped us get a little bit of a sense of the landscape of what conversations are going on around energy policy opportunities, energy justice topics that we want to have our eyes on. And now it's time for me to cue you in on how we can put our eyes on those things. You don't have to go into city council for 5 hours to participate and sharing your voice and asking questions. We can do this tonight, tomorrow, any day of the week, and that's through using ISeeChange. So I know many of you are familiar with ISeeChange. I've seen many of our amazing community engagement leaders shout out on this call. Really happy to see you guys here. I am going to give a super quick overview of what it is, just for people who aren't as familiar, and then tell you about how we're using it here in New Orleans to help guide to help understand our priorities around both energy and other climate and infrastructure topics. So ISeeChange is a platform where community members can share their experiences, stories, and data about all things climate and infrastructure, whether it's, hey, my street's flooding every day in August, or why is my energy bill 40% higher than last month? You can post it on ISeeChange. We're connecting this data with decision makers who need to understand what community members are experiencing. So these are cities, engineers, nonprofits, and researchers leading the way. As part of the People Empowering Projects, or PEP initiative, you may have heard of us. This is led with Healthy Gulf and Committee for a Better New Orleans. And if also, I meant to do this at the beginning, but if Jordan or Nellie, and you guys already know Nellie, wanted to say hello. You've met Sage, we're the ones spearheading this, so couldn't do without them. But with the PEP initiative, we're trying to expand the impact by teaching New Orleanians how to take a community record of their experiences on the app. So not only sharing their experiences through climate and infrastructure, but also talking to their neighbors, to their family members, to their coworkers, and helping expand the amount of people sharing their experiences. So through this, we're hoping to create an ecosystem of climate and infrastructure data. People all throughout the city sharing with us, when is it flooding? When is your power going out? Has someone dumped something on your street? Where do you see that you need more trees in your neighborhood and it's, it's too hot? We're getting a lot of information. We've been doing this in the past year, and ISeeChange has existed longer than that. But we really want to build up that ecosystem, especially in the time that we're in with these funding opportunities opening in front of us. ISeeChange also, so as I mentioned, it works a lot like social media. You post a photo, you post a caption, and you share your information about when you saw what you saw and where you were when you saw it. You also have the ability to add more information, and it packs a punch. It's a lot of data that can really go a long way in terms of applying for funding or informing planning projects, or understanding, research questions on how the community is experiencing different issues. So each post is really loaded with high quality content in that sense. We can also sync to sensors. If you want to help us track heat or rain, call me. I will drop a rain gauge or a heat sensor off at your door. We are tracking as much as you guys are willing to, and that it really can help us understand a lot because this is hyper local, block by block experiences. And we're also, every single post is synced to a weather measurement. So when you're posting, it's going to know the temperature it was when you posted, the precipitation then, and 3 hours, 6 hours past. So it's really chock full. What I want us to do today, sorry, that's a lot for people who are new to the platform. If you want to know more about ISeeChange and get a walkthrough, again, call me anytime of the week or check out our website. We got resources. But we're going to look at what some posts that are speaking to the infrastructure opportunity, or excuse me, the funding opportunities that Jackson mentioned are doing. So what are people sharing in their photos and their language that can be powerful in terms of helping direct that funding? So here we're looking at someone who's quite literally posted a photo of their energy bill. I know it feels weird. It's not something you would think about sharing on Instagram necessarily, but it's actually really powerful. They're showing us that they use 180% more energy than the same time last year. That's crazy. You can see that the temperature is not skyrocket high for them. And we're actually able, because they posted it at the same month of the last year, to say, hey, what's going on here? This is back to that accountability factor that people were talking about. This is helping create a community record in a way that is not often done. Here on the other side of things, we're looking at cold temperatures. We were just talking about retrofitting houses. So we're seeing an inside temperature that's nearly the same as the outside temperature. If we were in a room all together, I'd say raise your hand if you've lived in a poorly insulated house in New Orleans, and a lot of us probably would be raising their, yeah, there, I see it, Nellie. So someone's reflecting on, no central heat, poor insulation, it can get cold, and it's not affordable. This is a single experience that we could start tracking throughout the city. We could see which neighborhoods are experiencing this worse, and it really paints a picture. Here we're shifting into a different area of fuel. So I think we all remember last spring when gas became completely unaffordable. There was a gas crisis, and people up in New Jersey were reporting nearly $7 per gallon. So this is not only helping track these changes over time, but it's also giving your community a heads up and queuing people in on what you're seeing. And then people are recommending solutions. It's not just flagging the negatives, it's also saying, we want to see more electric cars in response to this. We have people talking about cost burden. So when it gets cold, we think about how the ratepayers are the ones that shoulder this burden. Thinking about fossil fuels we extract in our leaky buildings with inadequate insulation. And these are things you can actually even show. They didn't choose to show with a photo here, but if you got bad insulation, take a picture of the gap in your floorboards or the creak in your window where the wind blows in. You know, these are all pieces of data that can actually be used to tell a story and to show the need for these fundings. And recommending a solution. So moving towards net zero building codes, will the infrastructure money support that? Here, tying into some of those environmental justice and energy justice questions. What are the health burdens or the environmental risks on people who live near large energy industries? So someone reporting a diesel barge flipping over, back to also keeping a record and keeping people accountable in these senses. So this is now something we could draw back on and say, on this day at this location, this happened, you know. You can also use this, a key way that people have used ISeeChange is to track outages. So we were talking about, Jackson mentioned Hurricane Ida, the huge outage crisis that followed. So someone's reflecting about how they had too much of it. They had to go, the heat pushed them out, and then they weren't even seeing power until they reached Brookhaven, Mississippi. Gas stations having long lines. This is, again, creating a record of both how challenging that was, but also how long these outages lasted. Here, someone in California writes, the power's been out for 36 hours so far and predicted to be out for another 24. This was a preventative measure due to high winds and dry conditions, which could cause a wildfire. Not something we're experiencing here, but certainly interesting. And they're sharing their knowledge with their community members to say, hey, this is why our power has been out. Gas stations were a challenge, but community members are pulling together to help them out. So generating community support, community knowledge, and building the bonds that people already have so strongly here. This ISeeChanger was really posting something intense. So this was in Boston last summer, I believe, which was experiencing some insane heat waves. So they were tracking the extreme temperatures there. And when people have power outages in Boston, and when they experience extreme heat, they don't have air conditioning quite nearly as often as we do. So they're tracking the outage. They're saying that this is a huge public health concern, that it's really scaring people, and that there was actually people who reported being trapped in elevators. So these are intense things that, you know, if this had just happened and no one recorded it, it might just be someone's story that they keep in their mind that terrible day when this happened. But now it's a record to show, hey, this is not acceptable. You bring this to your counselor, you bring this to a utility, you bring this to whomever you need to have that conversation with, you know, or other nonprofits, whoever's leading that conversation can point to this and say, this is unacceptable. This happened multiple times during the summer, you know, it's creating a record. And, you know, also people are sharing how they're adapting, what solutions are on people's minds, not just what challenges we're going through day to day. So we're seeing people, you know, keeping shades down and baking at night in an attempt to keep their homeschool. More people talking, the heat waves are getting brought into this a lot in this energy conversation, obviously, but we will be doing another session exploring heat with trees. But here they're exploring, you know, solar panels on the roof, a vegetative roof, or reflective paint, or things they might like to see in their community. And here an architectural solution. So how can we utilize natural light in a way to help reduce energy usage, environmental impact, and saving money? So these are all, you know, interesting questions we want to be asking ourselves. What do we think fits into our needs as a community? So just kind of doing a quick recap on those. So things we want to look to do when we're, you know, when you share your story, and we're going to get you all the information on set up on how to do that if you haven't already. So like tracking affordability over time. Again, it feels weird sometimes to post your bill, but it's actually really important. And I bet you that many people are experiencing similar pains that you might be. tracking outages and impacts on health and well-being. So as Jackson was mentioning, this is that energy poverty. If people are experiencing outages for long amounts of time, how is that affecting your ability to work or, you know, your health? All of these things are really critical. How are you adapting to the current conditions that we're living in? And also, what solutions are a good fit for your community? You know, New Orleans is certainly a non-homogeneous city, so we want to make sure that we're advocating for solutions that make sense and aren't adding burden, as was mentioned earlier, to communities. So we want to start asking ourselves these questions and then advocating for the solutions that make the most sense to us. So we need your eyes. We need your eyes on this. I want everyone in the next week, because we're meeting here next week, you're going to be there, we're all going to be there, to help us reflect on this question of energy. And Jackson, first, I want to know, what are you going to post on ISeeChange in the next week to help tell your energy story? Oh, you're on mute.
That's a great question. I think I'll probably post my energy bills, which have gone up. I use flat billing, so it's averaged out for the year. They increased by about 30%. So it's going up everywhere, man.
Great. Sage, I'm going to call on you next. What are you going to post to tell your energy story in the next week?
I think I'm going to compare my light bill prior to when I put the installation up recently to what it is afterwards. I think I'm going to show how I insulated it and try to see my bill between the 2 different months.
And Nellie, you're getting kind of caught out of the blue. What are you going to post as your energy story?
I was actually just thinking about this just in case. There's a bunch of like really leany power infrastructure in my neighborhood. And as I take walks, it's leany enough to not only worry about the security of our power, but also about like how safe I am with my dog on the street. And that kind of stuff really matters, especially as we're entering hurricane season.
Certainly. That's a great example. So I would like to challenge all of you, just as we just said, make a goal, 3 posts. The first one's the hardest. The second one and the third one will come really easily. When are your biggest energy costs? These are just some questions. You don't have to use these. I'm just going to throw these out there. You can tell us a story. So this could be, you know, you stayed for Ida. And what did that look like? Do you have a photo from when you were sitting in your house or, you know, sweating it out? Do you have another photo from another time where you had an energy outage that affected you or an energy crisis that affected you? You can tell stories from the past too. What energy solutions would you like to see in your community? You could focus on that positive aspect. Hey, I really do want to see these beautiful old houses weatherized so that they can be more resilient. Or I do want to see, you know, these utility poles fixed and so that we can walk around feeling safe and comfortable in our neighborhood. We are going to be meeting here every week for the next 4 weeks. And we're going to cover different exciting topics: dumping and blight, complete streets, trees and heat, and flooding. And we don't have the exact details yet, but we're hoping to then take all of this great knowledge to the streets with an in-person session in May, where we're going to get out. We're doing events either way, so we're going to let you know as soon as we have those dates where we go on great pep walks as a community or as a group. We get out there and we take photos, and we're going to have music and food, hopefully. So we'd love to see you there. I'm going to put this up while we ask and answer more questions. And Nellie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, before we do that, Caroline, you know, I've been taking a list of a few people. Right now we have, including Nellie, 4 people, and we have 10 minutes left. I believe we could get to our 4 people right now. Nellie, if you don't mind, that's fine. And we had Shannon, Freddie, Gregory, and then Nellie. So Shannon.
Thank you. Once again, I appreciate this is my first time getting on one of these. A lot of good information. The only thing I want to say is from a worker's perspective that works, that has worked in both fossil fuel, nuclear, and, you know, trying to get into the solar and renewable, you know, we want to make sure that we're not forgetting about the workers. either through the industry or through elected officials. You know, if you take someone like even for the Lighthouse project, where they're going with the lowest bidder, instead of going with the best value for the community. If you're gonna feed the community electricity for that area, you know, let's give them some jobs and some training so they can have a career path also, not just the low cost for that little bit of time, and it doesn't really help them in the future. That's it.
Well, thank you so much for the insight. And what you highlighted was when we talk about solutions and exactly where it goes and how it get set up to make sure that we get quality results. Appreciate that for that comment. Freddie, you still there? Freddie was up earlier, had some technical issues, but we'll go with Gregory. You had your hand raised up and put down, but you have a comment.
Yes, thank you for that, Sage. I'm interested in identifying how we can utilize hydropower, hydroelectric to power certain sites that are tracts of land in New Orleans East, and utilizing this is a comment that I'm making in response to what we're discussing. Options for innovative energy solutions, hydropower, hydroelectric as well, and how we can use that to power large, vast tracts of land. And I see it working, and it's really cool. It's really cool. So I'm really excited, and I'm really excited to share our post on ISeeChange as it relates to illegal dumping and things related to that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do one of the partners want to respond to that? Jackson, Caroline, Nellie?
A good spot for hydropower would be specifically like take the next time you see an opportunity, you know, take a photo. You know, the more voices we have advocating for that, the more likely we can get someone to look into it and assess that, and that, you know, it gains momentum. So definitely share those thoughts. Let's all do that.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. I know a tower fell in a river during a storm. An electrical tower fell in the river, and that put power out. I think it was Hurricane Ida, and that put power out for New Orleans for quite some time. And we need to be more resilient, because I believe we have a transmission line that crosses the river that we are dependent upon. So that's part of what can we do different. And some community members thought, we have that moving river, why not use that river's energy for power? And that could be an idea that could be amplified if we can look at other places that uses this hydropower. Plus, you look at their quality of life when they use that hydropower, and look at some cost analysis. Great idea, Greg. Looking towards innovative solutions, and seeing how we could use an ISeeChange app to take pictures and document that. Thank you, Nellie. You're up next.
Thank you. I just wanted to share just a little bit of why and how CBNO relates into this project and what we're hoping to do with it. So Committee for a Better New Orleans is a nonprofit. We've been bridging the gap between people inside City Hall and outside City Hall since the 60s. And one of our main initiatives right now is, as Caroline said, taking advantage of the gajillions of dollars. It's trillions, we could get billions. We'll call it gajillions, that the city is eligible to receive through these two major funding programs. We fortunately have relationships with the City of New Orleans as well as with City Council around infrastructure work. So we meet very regularly with the folks who are coordinating the city's infrastructure applications. And so with this data, I very often hear folks say, like, well, what's it going to matter if I post? What's it going to matter if I do this? This is really going somewhere. Your post on ISeeChange will be compiled with other data. We're going to report that publicly on our website, share it out with the community, with other folks who are well positioned to apply for these funds, as well as with the city. Another thing that we're also doing, which I think speaks very well to Shannon's point in this concept around workforce development, is there are all kinds of other things besides getting data from the community. There are way more things that we can do as a city, that the city government can do also to be prepared to receive these funds and in a really good position to win the grants. One of those things we know, since Jackson mentioned the Justice 40 framework that requires spending in disadvantaged communities, is we're going to need to come up with a framework for how the city actually makes equity possible. What things are they going to do? Which data are they going to consult, et cetera? We're working on that with a big group of stakeholders and community partners. If you want to be a part of it, we would love to have you. We're looking at building equity into every phase of the infrastructure pipeline, from thinking of a project all the way down to building it and the worksite practices on that construction site. So my name is Nellie. I'm the director of CBNO. My email is nellie@cbno.org. I'll drop it in the chat again, but we'd really love to have you participate.
Thank you so much for that. Wow, Ned, I really appreciate CBNO been on advocating for the community in these funds since we heard about it. Thank you for that. And I'll reiterate this, and we have a couple more minutes. But also Hunter said something in the chat early on. He said, could a city provide solar to residents? Is that possible? I love to talk about a people-oriented solution. So before we wind up, this is a people equity question in innovative solutions. Is that possible? Seems like the solar program right now hasn't been working for residents that they instituted. Anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, I responded to this in part. I think that there are definitely ways to get creative about this, right? So if the city of New Orleans wanted to pursue IRA funding and say, we're going to do a residential and business solar program where we're going to, in addition to the federal rebate programs that exist, the city of New Orleans is going to provide direct financial support to anybody who wants solar panels on their roof. And you could do this in combination with things like the Lighthouse Initiative, and get it done that way. You could also have, so I live in Lafayette, I mentioned, we have the municipal utility, the Lafayette Utility Services, LUS. And LUS is actually planning to transition to about 50 to 60% of all municipal power provided by solar. And so the way they're doing that is the utility is actually buying energy from planned solar farms to provide that energy. And so Entergy Entergy New Orleans in theory could do the same thing. Whether or not they will has a lot to do with what the city council tells them to do. And New Orleans has a renewable portfolio standard that's going to require Entergy to get more renewables online in the coming years to provide electricity. And Entergy does seem to be showing some interest, not entirely sure if it's sincere or not yet, but interest in putting solar, investing in solar around the state. So we'll see how that comes together. But all that to say, there are ways to provide municipal solar, whether that means directly to people or doing it through utility process.
Thanks, Jackson. For Entergy New Orleans, our Entergy system has local controls, is regulated by the city council, and they're elected. So while that's going on, we think about voting, we think about elections, we think about energy. Let's get at those people and push them. Caroline, so on you, want to take it away?
Do we have any other questions before we wrap up? I'm not in the chat right now, but I can kind of jump out of here.
Not particular questions. We have some comments that we can go through. Maisha said, I would guess the city could do that with a request in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funds grant from EPA. But I think the current strategy is to make the finance authority a green bank. Maisha, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? You said a couple of entities of grant funds and finance authority, a green bank. Some terminology may want to help us, and it's a great opportunity to let me get my pen out.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, sorry. I mean, I guess I'll turn. I'm not looking the best, so this is my off work like crazy here. But anyway,
Not to put you on the spot. You can go off camera. It's fine. It's okay. You're coming through well.
Okay, appreciate it. Yeah, I was hearing about, what was that last week during NOE, that that the finance authority, that their approach is to go ahead and, because the finance authority being a quasi-governmental entity with the city of New Orleans, they're going to be planning on putting in a request instead of, like, the city directly, for the greenhouse gas reduction funds. So these are some grant funding. I think it's like a total of something big and ridiculous, like $72 billion, but it's across nationwide, and different entities and governmental organizations and nonprofits can apply to receive these funds. Put in a proposal, RFP sort of process and everything of their ideas and concepts of how everyone plans in their area to reduce greenhouse gases. And so I think the current strategy that I heard from what's his name, Burns, he's with the finance authority, is that they will apply for these funds to be able to become like a green bank, basically, allow for organizations, for companies and things like that, and folks like that, to directly apply for loans, or just like funding for project ideas, concept ideas that would fit within the mission of greenhouse gas reductions. And but the finance authority will be applying for the federal funds through the EPA, and then from the finance authority in New Orleans, then folks can then request funding for their individual projects through that. So instead of like an approach of the city just asking for, hey, we want a bunch of these funds just to give so many number of homeowners solar, they're kind of doing it like a little bit market driven approach, but using that technique. So that's what I was just saying, that I'm giving a little bit back. Thank you for Elizabeth putting finance NOLA in the chat. So that's the basis of my information though on it.
Well, thank you for the information. That's just really very useful. And that's working out those nuances beat us calling a bunch of lines and being redirected, right? That's the hard part. And thank you for joining this webinar and contributing so well. We also saw in the chat, we pay most of the bill to energy for them to recoup their hurricane and system repair costs. And I see some storms on my bill that don't hit our area. Does anyone who know about that want to comment on the recoup costs of our bill? Anyone that familiar with that process?
Just a comment. I actually read something about that, a report that was published like maybe a few hours ago in WDFU, convent that has some concerns related to what you're just referring to. And it was my first introduction to the solar garden that these nuns are proposing on a 22-acre tract of land in New Orleans East. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with that story, but it speaks to your concern, Sage. So myself included, am interested in learning a little bit more about the impact that will have for the end user as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear nuns are doing it. I know there's a solar farm by Folgers, and Folgers is one of those entities that the community has been trying to get a fair share of their taxes, and there's been a fight. But in having a nuns do a solar farm, I think it definitely gets to people who need it. And that's one way. As a solar farm is where you have a real farms, solar panels out, and they would basically move to where as the sun rises and sets, and it can contribute a lot of energy back into the system. Yep. Thank you so much.
After the hour, wanted to thank everyone so much for coming here. Just a heads up, I'm seeing a lot of great things in the chat, so I'm going to try to save the chat and kind of distill those in the follow-up email, any like links or resources people have sent. And then also we'll be sharing the recording. Send it to your people. If you feel like you learned something through all the insights Jackson brought in, or if you want someone you know to help start tracking things on ISeeChange around energy, please feel free to forward that on, bring them into the conversation, invite them next week, because we're going to keep diving deep on these and keep these rich conversations going. So please invite them, please forward this on to them. We'll keep these conversations going and asking, we love hearing these questions and learning from you all as well. Thank you, Jackson, so much for sharing with us. Thank you, Nellie. Thank you, Sage. Thank you, everyone else who just joined into this rich conversation. Any other thoughts from others before we enjoy the rest of this muggy spring evening, and we can all go, walk in the grass and feel it in our toes or something.
Night, y'all. Thanks.
All right.
Thank y'all. Enjoy your night.
Thank you all. See you next
Last
week.
minute question, where we can find the recording. We'll be emailing that out to everybody who registered. We'll also have a home online, which we'll also send out.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Nellie.
Great program, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks all.